Funding for Lawmakers comes from
the University of West Georgia in Carrollton, ensuring a better life for Georgians in the 21st century. More than 100 programs of study prepare students for successful careers in the critical professions of education and nursing, as well as business and the liberal arts. The Georgia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of Georgia's business community, over 4,000 members strong, working with lawmakers for over 90 years to make sure that our state remains a place where companies thrive.
And by supporters of Georgia Public Broadcasting. Thank you.
Coming up on Lawmakers, the House passes the FY 2009 amended budget, legislation that would allow utility companies to charge current customers for future nuclear power plant improvements receives final passage, and we'll talk with Tom Crawford of CapitalImpact.com for his thoughts on this week under the Gold Dome. Those stories and more are coming up next.
Live from Atlanta, this is Lawmakers. Here are your anchors, Nwandi Lawson and David Zelski.
Good evening, everyone. Also on tonight's broadcast, the Senate votes to strengthen the state's trauma care network by forming a new agency.
And the leadership shakeup at the Georgia Department of Transportation. We'll talk with GPB Radio's John Sepulvado. But first, our top story tonight. The House approves the first of two budget bills this session. The House has passed the mid-year budget. House Bill 118, the supplemental appropriations legislation for fiscal year 2009, is an $18.9 billion spending plan that uses hundreds of millions of dollars of federal stimulus money to soften the blow of deep spending cuts. Declining tax revenues have forced the appropriations committees in both the House and Senate to cut $2.6 billion in state spending to avoid a deficit situation.
Our state fiscal recovery will lag behind the nation, and so we are set to have to deal with tough budgets for the next few years.
The good news, Harbin says, is that state agencies that have already undergone $980 million in cuts will not have to furlough more workers this fiscal year. House Republican leaders say they've been conservative in allocating stimulus dollars.
There's still some question as to what some of those category sources can be used for. Look, we are looking to accept and use as much of that money as we can. We're not looking for reasons not to use it. But when you go through that process, it's like the governor has said and all of us have said over the past week or so, it's important that when we recognize those funds, we know that it doesn't come with strings attached that will cause us problems in the next couple of years.
Harbin says stimulus money will maintain the homeowners tax relief grant for this year.
This will avoid any tax increases. This will avoid any property owners getting an additional assessment or additional bill from their county commissions or their city councils.
Saying that he began the session intending to vote against the budget, House Democratic leader DuBose Porter credits Democrats in Washington for his current support of the measure.
We've got to decide what's important in this state and find a way to fund it. We didn't do that this fall, and as a result, we closed war veteran homes, but we signed the agreement to build fishing ponds in Middle Georgia. Now, you know I put out a fishing guide called Porter's Guide to Hunting and Fishing in Middle Georgia. Nobody loves it more than I do. But sometimes you have to put some things off because we've got to take care of people. And we didn't do that this fall, but because we weren't engaged. I want to thank everybody for looking at this with the priorities and plugging those holes in education and plugging those holes in health care. And we need to plug the holes in unemployment.
HB 118 passed the House 168-5. Now that measure goes to the Senate, where it's expected to be on the floor next Thursday. The Georgia Nuclear Energy Financing Act will officially move to the governor's office. The House of Representatives gave SB 31 final passage this morning. Lawmakers Gena Evans is live at the Capitol with more. Brittany.
Thanks, Nwandi. SB 31 allows utility companies to charge customers to cover the cost of building nuclear power plants before those plants are built. One project in particular would involve Georgia Power's construction of 2 new nuclear reactors at Plant Vogtle near Waynesboro. SB 31 is one of the most controversial bills this session, and that controversy was no less intense today on the House floor as legislators argued over the financial impact of SB 31 on ratepayers. Debate began with one of the bill's sponsors, Representative Bill Harbin.
What happens is the ratepayers of Georgia Power, will have to pay 25% more when they start paying for the plant in 2016.
We are signing a blank check on behalf of Georgia families, seniors, children.
75 cents out of every dollar goes not to financing the project, but to shareholders and executives.
With the passage of SB 31, Georgia Power ratepayers can expect to see a $1.30 increase on their monthly bills beginning in 2011. Many in opposition to the bill argue that the General Assembly was overstepping its responsibility by not giving the choice to the Public Service Commission, who usually makes utility rate decisions. Representative Harbin defended the bill.
This just ensures there's some stability in this financing model, and by putting it into statute, it makes it a little more difficult to change.
SB 31 passed with a vote of 107 to 66. The sponsor of that bill was, of course, Representative Ben Harbin. The House voted 120 to 44 to have the bill immediately transmitted to the Senate, who will send the bill to the governor's office. The Public Service Commission will hold a hearing to approve Georgia Power's plans for Plant Vogtle on March 17th. Reporting live from the House chamber, I'm Gena Evans for Lawmakers.
Okay, thanks for that report, Brittany. Well, over in the Senate, 9 bills passed on the floor today, including one House bill. Senator Jack Murphy opened today's debate with SB 68, which revises the guidelines of alcohol sales restrictions when it comes to proximity of certain housing authorities. He uses a situation in Winder, Georgia, as an example.
The housing authorities, especially the one in Winder, is wanting to put a mixed-use type development in there and allow a restaurant to serve alcohol beverages. It's funny that they can have a liquor store, but they can't have a restaurant that would serve alcoholic beverages.
After the 32-14 passage of SB 68, Senator Eric Johnson presented SB 69 on behalf of Senator Renee Unterman. This bill expands the definition of sexual exploitation.
Atlanta is a hub for commercial sexual exploitation. 200 or 300 girls a month are victims of this, and the average age is 14. So I would encourage you, it's a simple bill. It just expands from child's parent or caretaker to any person. The reporting is to DFACS, then it's up to DFACS to investigate the case, rescue the child, and report it to law enforcement.
Senator Unterman's bill passed without dissenting vote and also goes to the House, along with SB 164, a measure from Senator Don Balfour which sets a 75-foot height regulation for highway billboards. The bill also creates a $4,000 fee for vegetation removal, a measure both Senator Balfour and Democrat Steve Thompson agree properly addresses environmental concerns.
Billboards can be as high as 125 or 150. This will reduce all billboards to 75 feet. This also has a fund that will put money aside for replanting trees or wildflowers, depending on which the DOT requests.
The bottom line is I've run out of reasons to vote against it. They've done a good job, and I commend them for it, and I hope you will vote for the amendment from myself and the Rules Chairman and then vote for the bill.
Despite vocal opposition from Senator Seth Harp and a few others on vegetation removal fees and provisions, the bill passed 41-7. Senator Greg Goggins then presented SB 165, which creates an extra layer of evaluation for Medicaid and Peach Care applicants.
The bill I'm bringing to you today authorizes now the Department of Community Health to work jointly with the Department of Revenue to now validate the income statements of applicants.
And House Bill 233 wrapped up today's Senate debate. This bill, carried in the Senate by Senate Majority Leader Chip Rogers and engrossed at the beginning of the day, puts a 2-year moratorium on assessment increases for property which is subject to ad valorem taxation. That bill, sponsored in the House by Representative Edward Lindsey, ended up passing 42-5 by committee substitute, so it now goes back to the House. Well, the state Senate today overwhelmingly passed a measure creating a new state entity, one designed to carry out the day-to-day work of the Georgia Trauma Care Network Commission. Lawmakers Valerie Edwards is live at the Capitol with this report. Valerie.
David, the new entity will be called the State Office of EMS Trauma. When advocates speak about trauma care, they talk about the golden hour, the time in which a patient's chance of survival greatly increases if they can get to a trauma care center in time. And statistically, the survival rate from serious injury in Georgia is 10 to 20% behind the national average. Take a look at this map by the group Georgia, It's About Time. It highlights areas around the state within the golden hour. They're in red, but now look at the blue and purple parts of the state, where the nearest trauma care center can be up to 100 or more miles away. Senator Cecil Staton of Macon sponsored SB 156, which sets up the State Office of EMS Trauma.
To support readiness, to support and strengthen emergency medical services, particularly in rural areas, to develop a statewide trauma transfer and communication system, to build a network infrastructure. And one other thing I would add, they will be working closely as the policy-making organization or board for the Office of EMS Trauma.
Recently, the commission published its list of recommendations for a healthy trauma care system. They include increasing the number of trauma care centers, especially in South Georgia. One other recommendation from the Trauma Commission is to strengthen EMS services in rural parts of the state. Finally, funding for trauma care. $58 million was allocated in 2008, but nothing this year. Ideas now under consideration in the legislature include super speeder fines designed to bring in $23 million annually, and SR 277, which calls for a $10 car tag and could bring in approximately $78 million a year. Reporting live from the House chambers, I'm Valerie Edwards for Lawmakers.
Thanks for that report, Valerie. Well, Senator Preston Smith presented a resolution in the Senate today which urges Congress to oppose any attempt to remove the employee option for secret ballot elections, known as the Employee Free Choice Act. However, Senator Vincent Ford and a few others said this resolution is way off base about what the Employee Free Choice Act does and that we need to worry about Georgia issues instead of national issues. Senator Smith begins.
We take this very seriously in our country. If you told your citizens that they would no longer have the right to a secret ballot in their communities for who they elect to office, for example, they would send you home to bake those cookies. They would not want you to do that, and you know that. And there is no reason why you would not want to have a secret ballot unless one side or the other wants to intimidate its employees into voting a certain way. The nice thing about a secret ballot is it protects both sides. It protects the employees from the company knowing that they voted against them and retaliating, and it protects the employee from the union knowing they may have voted for or against the union and having some kind of reprisal or retaliation against them.
I'm real concerned that we're urging Congress to do something when we have a chance right here in Georgia to help the unemployed. That's what this ought to be about, and I'm concerned we're talking about superfluous issues.
Now, Senate Resolution 49 passed by a vote of 39 to 18, and this one was not exactly along party lines. Well, although the Transportation Investment Act did pass through the Senate Transportation Committee yesterday, some members voiced concern that there were too many questions unanswered. Senate President Pro Tem Tommy Williams, the sponsor of SB 200, attempted to answer these questions by explaining that the major issue is how money was being spent during the allotted times for road construction.
It's not the construction side. Once they get the job, they get it done. I don't necessarily think it's the money side. If you can get that project from the time DOT says, yes, we're going to do this, to here it is, let it. It's that span of time which allows for steel and concrete and asphalt and labor and equipment to rise so high that we find we don't have any money for any jobs anymore.
Now, even with opposition from several of the committee members, SB 200 did get a due pass through the committee and will now move to Senate rules.
Now we have the results of this week's online poll for you. When we asked, would you support bringing back the sales tax on food to generate more revenue for the state, 58% of you said no, while 42% of the respondents said yes. Please be sure to visit gpb.org/lawmakers to vote in the next legislative issue poll.
Well, it's the end of the 6th legislative week under the Gold Dome. The perfect time to check in with Tom Crawford, national editor of CapitalImpact.com. I had a chance to sit down with Tom earlier and began by asking him about the governor's choice to turn down federal stimulus money for Medicaid.
It was an important step for the governor because one of the biggest shortfalls is in the Medicaid health insurance program, and There was a lot of concern. How do you plug that hole? How do you keep people from crowding into the hospital emergency rooms and such as that? With Governor Perdue accepting $465 million in the current budget, that keeps the program whole for this year, and it looks like it'll be in pretty good shape for the next 2 years as well. So that was one of the big worries I know about the budget shortfall that Governor Perdue was trying to deal with, and that solves a major problem for the state.
Well, what are some of the plans floating around of ways to plug some of that money that we aren't going to get?
The only money the governor has talked about us not getting, perhaps, is the money to pay unemployment insurance benefits. Now, there is some thought that in the end he'll come along or he'll come around and accept that money as well, but that's really, I think, the only problematic area right now. And other than that, there's a lot of money coming in for Medicaid, as I mentioned, and for education. So a lot of problems really are being solved.
Well, let's talk about one of the issues at the beginning of the year. This is one of the governor's initiatives that he announced at the Eggs and Issues breakfast. That was tort reform, and the first bill to come along gave a lot of immunities to biomedical companies, pharmaceutical companies, but it got to committee and was voted down 4-7 this week. Talk about that a little bit.
If you were a biomedical company or a pharmaceutical company based in Georgia, you literally couldn't be sued by someone who might have been harmed by taking your drugs if you could show that the Food and Drug Administration had already given approval for that particular drug. Trial lawyers very unhappy with that, as were a lot of the consumer advocates as well, because it really does give complete or almost complete immunity to companies who might, for whatever reason, negligently harm their customers. So a lot of concern about that bill. I was a little surprised it didn't make it out of committee, but it was a very resounding defeat for the governor in committee, and I have to imagine he wasn't very pleased with that.
And do you think this makes a statement for the next tort reform bill coming along, the fact that this one didn't even come to a vote on the floor?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, he has another tort reform type bill. I believe he refers to it as loser pays, but I don't see that as having any better chances of passage as the one that got defeated in committee a couple of days ago.
Well, let's shift on to transportation. We've been hearing plans year after year, it seems, and this year the big three, Speaker, Lieutenant Governor, and Governor, have finally come together, and this is the Transforming Transportation Act. Talk about that a little bit.
That's an act that would basically do away with the current Department of Transportation and the State Transportation Board as we know it. It would shift really a lot of power into the executive branch, because it would give the governor, and to a lesser extent the lieutenant governor and the speaker, more power over who's appointed to the State Transportation Authority and who's making the decisions on what roads are built, what transit systems are started up. And I know that there is a lot of concern about giving this sort of power to the governor's office, and also it tends to cut the Democrats out completely. If you're a Democratic member of the House or the Senate, there's really no need for you to vote for this bill, because it really does lock in the power to the Republican leadership that currently exists. So that bill is coming out, I think, probably for a House floor vote next week. It may or may not pass, but that's one that's going to have a lot of discussion before they take a final vote on it.
Okay, Tom, as always, great insight into everything going on at the General Assembly. Tom Crawford, CapitolImpact.com. Thanks again for joining me.
Great to be here.
The head of the State Department of Transportation was fired today. GPB Radio's John Sepulvado was at the meeting of the DOT board this afternoon when Gena Evans was terminated.
The board members that voted to terminate her said it had to do with the fact that there were a slew of projects that weren't being completed. They wouldn't offer any specifics. They wouldn't get in any more detail. And they were quick to get out. They voted, and they started making a beeline for the elevators pretty much right away. Governor Perdue clearly doesn't think that that's the case. Governor Perdue, of course, has been critical of the board. I believe he called them dysfunctional. Mm-hmm. He also is, as we know, aiming to rip out a lot of the DOT's authority, and he thinks it's political payback. The exact words he used was vendetta, because of course Gena Evans is closely aligned with the governor.
That's true. What's the impact now? There's a lot of DOT projects out there, as you've mentioned, on the table. What's the impact of this?
And the stimulus. Don't forget, there's almost $1 billion worth of transportation funding that's going to come from the stimulus. It's unclear what the impact is going to be. Right now they have a capable interim director or commissioner who's come through the ranks. But the key is going to be, will stimulus projects be delayed? Will they be transparent enough? Will they meet the federal regulations? Remember, President Obama has said anybody who's not up to stuff, we're going to take that money, give it to another state. So if Georgia's not on its game, that money could go to Alabama, that money could go to South Carolina, well, maybe not South Carolina, but other states. So that's the key, and I think that's the pressure of whoever's going to run the DOT, or who's running the DOT now.
So what do you think the political fallout then is going to be from all this?
From the sound of lawmakers who reacted to this, I think that SB 200, which would gut the DOT, I think that it has higher chances of passing now, because I think there's a lot of people who are angry at the board for making this decision, especially at a time when critical federal funds are coming in.
And Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle held a press conference this evening to speak out against that firing. Representative David Ralston introduced legislation today intended to restructure the DOT and limit its power. That measure was assigned to the House Transportation Committee.
You may remember last year time ran out before the House could pass an early version of the Landowners Protection Act, so some senators have revived the effort this year. And today, SB 75 passed the Senate Judiciary Committee. Lawmakers Emily Banks filed this report.
The Senate Judiciary Committee's due-pass recommendation came quickly today for Senate Bill 75. If it becomes law, it would waive landowners' liability for any death or injury to a hunter or fisherman on their property. Bill sponsor Senator Bill Heath explained the legislation.
Essentially what this is saying is that if you allow someone to come on your property for the purposes of hunting, fishing, agritourism, that there is some immunity that can be had by the landowner.
Landowners must post warning notices at the main entry points in order to waive liability. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Emily Banks.
Now, if the Landowners Protection Act does become law, it would be effective upon the governor's signature. The bill now moves to Senate rules. And the Senate Ethics Committee gave a due-pass recommendation to Senate Bill 96, introduced by Senator Kasim Reed. This bill, which passed the Senate unanimously last year but failed to become law, includes several measures intended to provide ethics reform in local and state governments, particularly relating to lobbyists. SB 96 precisely defines what a lobbyist is, lays out requirements for lobbyist registration, and mandates semi-annual training on their duties and responsibilities. The bill now moves on to the Senate Rules Committee.
Students from local elementary schools joined forces with senior citizens to show their support for House Bill 37. This bill would allow 24 hours of unpaid leave for employees to attend their child's school events, their own medical appointments, or an elderly parent's doctor's appointments without fear of losing their jobs. Lawmakers Tiana Fernandez has more.
You should not have to choose between whether or not you're going to take care of your family obligations, your child's education, your parents' health. You should not have to make a choice between that and whether or not you're going to be able to keep your job.
Representative Roger Bruce, sponsor of HB 37, continued to explain how important it is for a parent to be involved in a child's education. Currently, an employee is allowed job protection for jury duty and to vote, but is not given any protection to attend school functions. Ariel Jones, a 5th grade student, expressed her disappointment when her mom was not able to attend an event at her school.
This year, my school hosted a holiday lunch for parents to come and eat with their children. Due to her work schedule, my mom was not able to attend. That made me feel bad.
Job protection is also not guaranteed for employees that need to take their elderly parents to medical examinations. Hilda Chambers at the Carrollton Senior Center talked about the problems that elderly parents with working children face.
Many seniors rely on their children to drive them to the routine doctor's appointment.
House Bill 37 is being supported by over 100 different organizations. It has been assigned to a committee, and they're hoping to get a vote this year. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Tiana Fernandez.
And Skin Cancer Awareness Day took place at the Capitol yesterday, offering information on the disease, skin checks, and a chance to talk to a dermatologist. Lawmakers' Alan Friedman has more.
Although it doesn't receive as much attention as other types of cancer, skin cancer is in fact one of the most common cancers, with over 1 million new cases expected this year in the U.S. alone. Today, to raise awareness and educate the public, dermatologists and activists passed out brochures, gave skin checks, and addressed people's questions and concerns. Both dermatologists I spoke to agree that one of the most important steps to be taken in skin cancer prevention involves educating the public on early detection. Dr. Katarina Chillers explains.
We need to raise awareness. What is a skin cancer? What does it look like? Just like you get a yearly mammogram or you get a yearly prostate exam, you should get a yearly skin check, especially if you live in Georgia.
The dermatologist had another reason for being at the Capitol today. An important piece of legislation was voted on in the Senate, SB 104, which would require a physician or trained assistant to supervise certain cosmetic laser procedures in order to prevent the accidental removal of spots or lesions, which could be early signs of skin cancer. The bill ended up passing in the Senate without opposition. Dr. Chillers said that the bill is an important step toward reducing the growing number of skin cancer cases in Georgia and nationwide. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Alan Friedman.
Yesterday, the House agreed to allow all Georgia mass transit systems to raise revenue by placing ads on their buses and in bus stops. Representative Mark Hamilton presented House Bill 101.
It's a proposition that basically allows transit agencies to sell and place advertisement on transit vehicles as well as facilities. In essence, it gives transit agencies the same authority and ability just as MARTA has.
HB 101 passed without opposition and moves to the Senate. And finally, if you noticed a lot of roses on the lapels of legislators today, it was in honor of the anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. Representative Dubose Porter told the House a story about how one woman impacted the ratification of the amendment, giving women the right to vote.
It says, "Dear whoever, before I die, I would like to have the chance to vote for my son. Love, Mom." At that point, he took off the red rose, went down and picked up the yellow rose, broke the tie, and understand that as the amendment was being passed across the country was one of the main events in U.S. history in giving women the right to vote. So see the power and influence that you've had in our lives well before this right was granted. So let me ask you, women legislators, to please stand and let us honor you. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you.
And just as a reminder, the Georgia General Assembly has adopted a 3-day-a-week schedule for the next 4 weeks. We will continue to bring you all the latest Capitol news on those legislative days because the General Assembly is in recess tomorrow and Monday, so Lawmakers returns on Tuesday, March 3rd at 7 p.m. And if you have missed any part of this Lawmakers broadcast, tune in tomorrow morning when Lawmakers repeats at 5:30 a.m. here on GPB Television. You can also see this episode of Lawmakers at 7 a.m. on GPB Knowledge. GPB Knowledge is available to those with digital television receivers at 0.3 of your local GPB transmitter. For example, 20.3 in Augusta or 8.3 in Atlanta. You can also keep up with all of the action under the Gold Dome daily on your local GPB radio station during Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and Georgia Gazette. Well, coming up on GPB Television, This Old House.
That's it for this, our 24th legislative day of the 2009 Georgia General Assembly. I'm Nwandi Lawson.
And I'm David Zelski. Good night. See you Tuesday.
This has been a production of Georgia Public Broadcasting.